start with saying that if Ohio is the heart of the heartland, then Columbus is the heart of Ohio, because we are centrally located, a lot of different assets. We could move on to the first slide. So I want to start with just a little bit of information about our organization, because while we're associated with Jobs Ohio, each of the regions, there's 6 regional organizations around the state, all are organized slightly different. We're a private, nonprofit organization focused on development of the community. But with that said, the majority of our funding actually comes from the private sector. We have about 300 private companies that fund the majority of our resources, our annual resources. They make an annual contribution, and we call them investors, but they're really investing in our goals and our vision. And our vision is to become the most prosperous region in the United States. And you can see how we define prosperity there. But basically, it really is about lifting more and more people in the region out of poverty and putting them in better economic situation. Next slide. And you know, every organization has some different things that they focus on. Ours really come down to 6 elements. Number 1 is serving our existing companies, making sure that they stay, grow in our region. So we spend a lot of time meeting one-on-one with the companies that are in our marketplace, understanding if there is an opportunity for growth, if there's a risk to closure, and then we try to engage and mitigate any losses and accelerate any opportunities for growth. Of course, attracting new industry is also a key part of what we do. And as a matter of fact, it's something that we've been quite successful with here in Central Ohio. You know, when you think about a pipeline of projects that a region works on, typically, you know, a region would maybe have 50-50, 50% new attraction projects, 50% expansion projects. We're typically 80-20. 80% of the projects that we're working on are new attraction, about 20% are existing industry. Now, that's changed a little bit with the pandemic. We do a lot of international work, which has really been shut down. We're probably closer to 70-30 right now, but that trend's returning, and so we're starting to see it. And I think we, you know, this time next year we'll probably be back to another 80-20, where 80% of the projects we're working on would be new to our region, new investment. Supporting entrepreneurship is also a big part of what we do. I'll talk a little bit about RevOne in a minute, but that's our main organization locally that does a lot of our seed funding. They also do acceleration and incubation services. They're located over by Ohio State. They also have relationships with a number of our communities around our region, where they operate incubators in places like New Albany and Dublin and so forth as well. Preparing communities to win. This is really about how we engage with our local partners. So I mentioned we have about 300 private sector partners. We have about 35 local partners that also fund us. These are the cities of, the county of. And so we actually have programs that are designed to help those companies be prepared to win projects. Things like site readiness. Do they have sites? Do they have speculative buildings ready for a company to move into? Are they prepared to pitch their community when they have a consultant or a company coming in? So these are all things that we work with our local communities to prepare them to win. Increasing global trade and investment as well. And this is a broad category. It's everything from just what it sounds like. We actually have export assistance programs where if we can help our companies export, obviously we get more global share. They can grow locally. But it's also about some critical things like air service development, getting air connections internationally, getting cargo connections. Something we've been very successful with since the pandemic is attracting new global international air service. On the cargo side, we have one of the largest inland ports just to the south of Columbus called Rickenbacker, and it is off the charts as it relates to cargo growth. And a lot of it is flights that are being removed from places like New York, LaGuardia, Chicago, because of the lack of belly freight coming in, more needing to be moved to pure freighters, and it's just a better option for a pure freighter. So there's a lot of areas that we're working in as it relates to increasing global trade and investment. And then obviously, we market and promote globally our region. And that's something that most organizations they're going to come out first and foremost and say, well, our goal is to market the region. We do that, but we look at it as a secondary element to really kind of what we're doing as it relates to attracting new industry and working with our existing companies first and foremost. There's a couple things. So if you're a freighter, you do have to defer to passenger flights. So they can circle, and circling burns fuel, and literally hundreds of thousands of dollars can be saved by coming into a cargo dedicated airport. And then there's the time. Right now, there's stuff that gets stuck on the tarmac, literally, in some of the major hubs, and it comes in, it gets off the tarmac very quickly. Matter of fact, we have some of our companies that are bringing product into Rickenbacker can get it into their warehouses in Chicago faster than they can when they bring it in directly to Chicago and go from the airport to the warehouse. So that just gives you just a couple examples of why. But you know, it's definitely an area that we continue to grow because with the supply chain disruption, we saw a tremendous shift. I mean, obviously PPE was coming in via air, but a lot of auto parts are starting to come in by air. You can't stop the automotive line, and if you can't get it in through your normal channels over the ocean, you got to start moving to air. So you know, those are all things that are really impacting the growth right now. Next slide. So, you know, I would say our structure service has served us very well. And our relationship with Jobs Ohio is a critical component of our structure as well. We're one of the 6 regional organizations. We're called the Jobs Ohio Network partner. And we receive funding from Jobs Ohio to provide certain services to the companies in our region, as well as I mentioned our private sector investment and then our communities investment. So where are we today? And I apologize, there's a state around the amoeba-looking red spot there, but the red spot is the 11 counties that we cover, which is right in the middle of the state of Ohio. But today, where are we? So we're #1 metropolitan area in the Midwest for population growth. We're #1 for job growth. And we're also #1 for GDP growth. And that's looking from 2010 to 2020 data. We were formed in 2009 as an organization to accelerate the economic development activity in our region. We had a goal of 150,000 net new jobs, $8 billion in capital investment. We blew all of that out of the water. We had significantly greater than the 150,000 net new jobs, and we were probably close to 12 billion in capital investment over that period. So in 2020, we started on a new route, and we changed our name. We were Columbus 2020 before. We learned you never put an expiration date in your name. And now we're One Columbus, and I think we're going to keep hold of this one for a while. Our metropolitan population is 2.5 million now, and our city of Columbus is just over 900,000. To put that into perspective, Cleveland's about 380,000 people, and Cincinnati's about 300,000 people. So we're larger than the cities combined. We're about the same size as Cincinnati's metropolitan area, though. Obviously, they have a lot of metro growth where we've had a lot of city growth in Columbus. And I was talking earlier about this. We're projected to add 1 million people, 1 million more people by 2050. And that's an anomaly for a Midwest Tier 2 city. You know, that's typically reserved for some of our larger Tier 1 cities in the Midwest, but as a Tier 2 city, we're going to be leading the pack as it relates to growth. Next slide. Well, Chicago's the main Tier 1 city in the Midwest. I mean, everything outside of Chicago is probably considered a Tier 2 across the Midwest. And so this is a little hard to see as well, but this is our population growth and our job growth compared to many of those other cities that we commonly compete with in the Midwest. And you can see we're leading both in population growth and job growth. And you know, this is again through 2020. I can tell you in 2021, our population has accelerated. We have had a tremendous amount of individuals that have moved back during the pandemic to the market. They've found employment here. Some of them have been moved back by their employers that had operations in our market from some of the larger coastal operations. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what drives our economy. And so here's just, there's two ways I want to look at it. One of them is by who's headquartered here. So Fortune, there's 16 Fortune 1000 companies that are headquartered in our market. Fortune 500 are on the left. L Brands is the one you can't see, obviously. That's been split recently. It's now Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, two separate companies, so it probably won't be a Fortune 500, but it might be two Fortune 1000 companies in the next round of Fortune rankings. But notable headquarters, we have Alliance, Battelle, some companies you may not be familiar with, like Root, Cover My Meds, but they're some of our largest and fastest growing companies. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then obviously we have major operations as well. Companies that aren't headquartered here, but literally have significant operations, like Honda, our largest manufacturer, about 10,000 people. In our region, there's some that are outside of our region as well. But Abbott, IBM, Amazon, Google, Upstart, which is another one I'll talk about in a minute, is a good example of some of the companies that are really driving our growth right now. Next slide. The other way to look at it is by sector, and I think this is one that really dives into one of the core elements of why we've been able to grow as a region, why we've been able to sustain growth. It's the economic diversity we have here. We're not over-reliant upon any industry sector. Matter of fact, there's not a single industry sector that employs more than 17% of our employment base. So if you think about a Detroit, they had massive growth, automotive driven, they got hit hard, they had a massive decline. Ours has been steady growth, and it's because of the economic diversity that we have here. We have automotive and mobility, which historically was automotive, but to Andrew's point, we're shifting now to mobility. We have operations like the Transportation Research Center here. It's the home of NHTSA. It's their only lab in the United States. So companies that want to do testing, it's one of the best places to do testing for autonomous technologies, driver assist technologies. And it's a fully independent testing facility as well. But we look at advanced manufacturing, finance and insurance is massive in our market. And people like Nationwide, Huntington Bank, JP Morgan Chase is our largest employer. I mentioned this earlier to a couple of you, but they have over 20,000 people in our marketplace. 5,000 technology workers, so all their customer-facing application development is done here. A lot of their enterprise-level development is done here as well. So we have the stalwarts here, but we also have the next generation, the Root Insurances, the upstarts are here as well. And they're leveraging a lot of the talent out of people like JP Morgan Chase and Nationwide Insurance. Retail and e-commerce is been growing exponentially. As a matter of fact, through the pandemic, one of our largest growth sectors has been e-commerce fulfillment. I won't go into that today, but if you drive around the community, you're going to see cranes in all of our suburban communities putting up bulk industrial buildings right now. Matter of fact, we're coming off of our, last year was our largest year ever for delivery of bulk industrial speculative. This year we're going to surpass it. So there's a tremendous amount of growth in that sector. It's one I won't spend a lot of time on, but we also have DHL's North American headquarters is here, which is the driver behind a lot of those buildings, and a number of others. Biomedical and health services is a sector that is a growth opportunity for us, and then obviously advanced computing is one that's emerged recently for us as well. I want to talk a little bit more about these two in a second, so I won't spend too much time here. Next slide. I just also wanted to mention, Andrew mentioned this too, international companies are a significant portion of our work, and it also adds a lot of diversity to the companies that we have in the marketplace. And just as we have a lot of diversification among industry sectors, having that international investment also really helps insulate us from a lot of the global economic conditions. While no one's ever 100% secure, I feel like our approach to continuing to encourage international investment further helps us as it relates to insulation from downturns and so forth. And again, it's broad. We have everything from Honda and companies like Magna doing production to companies like Klarna and BMW Financial Services on the financial sector here. Next slide. So I wanted to do a little deeper dive into two, maybe three areas, but really what's driving our innovation, and then I want to give you kind of our technology elevator pitch, because I know that you guys probably represent companies in a lot of different spaces, but I thought those might be the most relevant today. So, and again, this is just some samples of what I would consider topical points. But so Drive Capital is here. Drive Capital is the largest venture capital firm not on the coast. They have about $1 billion under investment now. They're just down the street on High Street here, and they have changed the perspective of our market single-handedly as it relates to technology investment. They've brought in a number of companies that they've invested in from around the Midwest and the East Coast, and they've brought those operations into our market, and they've thrived. And some of them I think they brought in kicking and screaming, but once they were here, they realized the value proposition. They've done quite well. RevOne Ventures, I mentioned earlier, they are our seed fund. They also operate one of the larger angel networks in the country here. So they have a suite of dollars, some of them from the state, but they also are now running innovation funds for some of our larger companies. And that's something new that they've started in the past few years that have been pretty successful. So it's let's say an insurance provider in the market, instead of doing some of their own innovation, is providing funding directly to RevOne to use their system to vet, fund, accelerate technology companies, and then they have a right to further invest in them. So, right now there's probably 3 or 4 various funds that they're managing, and they could be anywhere from $5 million, I think, to maybe $15 million in resources. Children's Nationwide Hospital has large research, and I kind of skipped over our bioscience sector, but they're really putting us on the map as it relates to gene and cell therapy. And so I'll talk a little more about it, but they are 5 years ago we weren't talking about this. 3 years ago we started to hear rumblings about it. Today it's all we can talk about, and we actually have a handful of projects I'll mention here in a minute directly related to spin-outs from that or associated with Children's Nationwide Hospital. And then Battelle. Many of you are probably familiar with Battelle Memorial Institute. They're the largest contract research organization in the world. They're headquartered here. They manage a lot of the national laboratories for the federal government. They've also been a steady stream of intellectual property that has been spun out into companies as well. They've been here for a long time. They've been at times under the radar, but now under some new leadership, they are becoming much more aggressive again as it relates to the innovation side of the business. And again, these are just a couple examples. There's many more venture firms here. There's others, but these are the big guys. Next slide. So one of the other things I wanted to talk a little bit about too is cloud computing. So if you have companies that are could benefit from low latency or require low latency, we're probably one of the top locations in the country for those operations. Amazon Web Services, Facebook, Google have now invested collectively billions of dollars in the market. They have thousands of acres under development right now for cloud computing centers in the marketplace. Google just announced a second round. AWS, I think, has 7 sites now, 6 sites in our market. And then Facebook has a major facility in New Albany. I think it's 500-600 acres, and it's going to be a 10-year build-out for Facebook. So this is a sector that we have a tremendous amount of chops in now, but we didn't 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This wasn't even on our radar as a opportunity for our market. And today, it's now spinning off a lot of corporate-owned data centers because they're like, well, Facebook and Google are there, maybe we should have ours there. There must be something, energy prices are reasonable, low risk of natural disaster. I mean, the things that drive a lot of the investment in data centers and cloud computing centers make sense here. Next slide. Well, this is a map of the United States, and you can see a number of cities. What I wanted to just talk about here is the sheer amount of fundraising in 2020 that companies in our market were able to achieve. It's $673 million in VC funds secured by companies headquartered in the marketplace. Now, we have some that are not headquartered here as well that have large raises as well. But, this was a record year for us. 2018 was a record year. 2020 was now a record year. And if you want to hit the next slide, it looks like this is through June, and that's the far right of 2021. We could be on track to break our record again this year. And this is also give you an idea of some of the key areas. The light blue is healthcare. So again, as I mentioned, when we talk about companies like Forge Biologics, Sarepta, they were, 16, 17, they weren't really on the radar for us. But now you can see they're a bulk of it. And then financial services is the green one that also is quite prevalent in our market. And that's people like Root Insurance. Cover My Meds is in the blue. So it gives you an idea of some of the key companies in our market that have been ultra successful in raising funds. Next slide. Well, this is also a map of the United States. It's not showing up, but you can see that on the far eastern side of the United States is Columbus. We're one of the top 10 cities for the attraction and retention of millennial population, the 25 to 34 age group. Matter of fact, we're the only region east of the Mississippi that made the top 10 list. And, places that you would expect, Austin, Denver, Salt Lake, San Francisco, San Jose, LA, those are typical, expected locations for that type of growth. Columbus isn't. It's a bit of an anomaly, but it's one of our strengths. And we're also ranked number 12 in the country for the attraction, not just the retention, but the attraction of millennials. And a lot of the startup companies, a lot of those that have received, the large tranches of VC are driving that attraction of the millennial population into the marketplace. Next slide. Everywhere. And I actually have a slide I took out that shows our in-migration. We are losing population to a handful of cities. The bulk of our growth is coming from places like Atlanta, Austin. We're getting a lot of growth out of Texas as well. And I think it's a lot of companies that have established operations in some of those key markets. And when they look for kind of the next frontier of where they want to put a tech office, we're on that radar. So we're getting people moving for the job. They have the job in a city. They're moving to Columbus to retain the job, to maybe start the office here, to take a leadership position, those sorts of things. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, too, I mean, we have a tremendous academic network here. There's, probably 50 colleges and universities that have about 125 to 130,000 students enrolled at any given time. We graduate annually just over 22,000 graduates just in our region, just in our 11 county area. So that's also fueling a lot of our ability to retain that population because we have the jobs, we have high job growth, we have people that are coming from all over the state and quite frankly all over the world. Ohio State has one of the largest population of international students in the country, of any university. I think, pre-pandemic they were around 7,000, 8,000 international students out of their 68,000. So that's it's more than 10%. So, there's a direct correlation, obviously, to our ability to get people in, get them educated, and keep them in the region. Next slide. Mhm. Well, I mean, so there is a tremendous amount of industry-sponsored research here, and that is one of the key drivers for innovation. It's, typically, I think, one of the, top, 15 public universities for industry-sponsored research. A lot of it's in the engineering program, so a lot of it is material sciences, and there are some new technologies coming out of the university. And I think that, while historically the number of patents has been relatively low, there's been a direct, focus on that with the past couple administrations at the university to innovate, and not just innovate for the sake of innovation, but innovate for the sake of driving corporate growth. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think that one is they are definitely generating a lot more technology. Their technology office is open. You can do intellectual scans if you're interested with the technology office. RevOne is teaming up with them now to take, and they're taking students out of the business school and coupling them with innovative ideas now, which wasn't necessarily happening aggressively before. I think that the double-edged sword part of it, though, is a lot of our research is industry-sponsored, so the industry retains the intellectual property. So there's a lot of great ideas that are coming out of the university, a lot of new technologies, new materials. But just to give you an idea, the number one sponsor for industry research at university is GE Aviation. Number two is Honda. So they're retaining a lot of that intellectual property that's being funded, little research. So I have two slides here. This is kind of where we get into our pitch. So, talent is number one with almost every company that we work with right now. And it's not the cost of talent, although that does come in later. It's the availability of talent. Can we get the people, number one? That is the number one factor for almost every project that we work on. And as you can see, this is just for, graduates, but, things like IT, data science, related programs, business management, we're churning out in our region about 6,500 annual graduates. If you look at Ohio, 29,000, and if you look at a 3-hour radius, 85,000. I give you these numbers because we are really the highest growth region within that area, and we have the highest job growth, so we are legitimately attracting from a 3-hour drive. And a lot of our companies that are recruiting are going out to universities that are 3 hours away. Matter of fact, even some of them further out. There's 13 of the top 50 engineering schools in the Midwest. 4 of the top 10 are in the Midwest. And we legitimately recruit from all of those. Next slide. Same thing as it relates to engineering. I won't spend any time here. Next slide. This is actually the Midwest engineering slide. You can see there's, like I said, 13 of the top 50 engineering schools in the Midwest. Next slide. This is some data that we typically provide companies. Now this is the whole gamut of way we would look at what we would call our tech stack. But typically when we're working with a company, they may tell us, hey, we're interested in artificial intelligence machine learning. And what this tells you is that there's over 5,500 people currently working in that space in our marketplace. And this is typically, we get this data from LinkedIn. So these are certifications typically that people are self-reporting on their LinkedIn profile. But then we can go over and say, oh, and by the way, here are the top 5 companies or 10 companies in our region that are employing individuals in that space. So that if you're thinking about coming in and AI, machine learning is your business, you're going to know who your competition is or maybe who a partner is. So these are sorts of things that we can provide companies that are looking at our market that want to do a deeper dive on who's here doing the same sort of thing, employing the same sort of people. Next slide. And apologize for the eye chart here, but this is showing wage rates. And I think what I'll do is, you'll just have to trust me here, but maybe the bottom portion is the most important. We always compare ourselves. I mean, there's always, I mean, if we're involved, there's competition for a project. No one's just saying we're doing this in Columbus. We'll work on those, but it's not one that we're doing incentives for, and we're working really hard for, because if they're going to just do it here, they're going to do it here. So there's always competition. So one way to look at wage rates is, let's say a company comes to us and say, we're going to have a software developer, and we're going to pay on average $100,000 a year. We'd like to pay on average $100,000 a year. What does that mean in your market? Well, in our market, you're 50th percentile. You can see the 50th right here in red. What you can't see is if you're in Chicago, you're in the 42nd percentile, meaning 58% of employers are paying more than you. What else you can't see is San Jose, you're in the 13th percentile, meaning that, 87% of employers are paying more than you. So you can hire as well a trained software developer for $100,000, and you're in the median in our market, or you're in the 13th percentile in San Jose. And there's a lot of things that drive that, obviously, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is really what it comes down to. Once a company is determined they can get the talent, and we demonstrate that through here's who's already employing them, here's who you're probably going to be attracting employees from, or here's a program that's you're going to be able to tap within a university, get the employees that you need. Next is price. How much is it going to cost me? And if we don't offer an advantage, we don't win a project. I mean, if we can't guarantee that we can help them get an employee through the program that Andrew was talking about, our talent attraction services, and we can't give an idea of the wage mitigation they're going to be able to achieve by moving into the Midwest and in Columbus specifically, then we're not going to win the project. Next slide. So a little bit about living here. Again, the bottom of this really tells the story. 77% of homes sold are affordable in our market compared to the median income. That's a stat that a lot of places can't spout. I mean, you look at a place like New York, San Jose, most people are going to rent forever. They're not going to own. Here, 77% of homes sold are affordable according to our median income. Average rents in our downtown are $1,269 a month, which is pretty outstanding. So these are some of the things that are really driving our overall cost of living. Matter of fact, our cost of living index is just over 90 here. 100 is average, so it's about 9-10% below the average community. But at the same time, you get access to world-class healthcare, some of the best public schools in the country, and obviously a great suite of private schools if that's your interest. Next slide. And obviously we have all kinds of sports teams here. We have an MLS team. We have the Blue Jackets. We have, of course, the Ohio State University professional teams. Now that they're paid for their likeness, and they're all going to be professional athletes. So any given Saturday, you can meet 110,000 of your favorite fans in the stadium, about 150,000 outside the stadium. So we have all kinds of great lifestyle here. Next slide. And one of the things that we're particularly proud of is the diversity and inclusiveness. These are just some rankings that we've received from like Forbes and others. But I think one of the things that we're particularly proud of is the list of companies along the bottom, which are headquartered in our market, and they've received a perfect score on the Corporate Equality Index. So not only is it our communities talking about inclusiveness and quality and diversity, but our companies are as well, and they're walking the walk. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Come join our 361 Firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.